Okay. The tea is poured. The men are seated. What are we going to talk about, man?
All right. So I'll just jump into it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is, and it's a question that's kind of come up in the work with clients and just in life in general, is like, what is therapy? So I'll give you sort of an image.
Yeah.
So we were on a trip, and there was like we were on a boat being shuttled between like this island and the mainland, and we met this family. And typically I don't like sharing that I'm a therapist when I'm meeting people. Sometimes like you'll share you're a therapist and they're like, oh, so you want to like hear everything, like you want to like process all my trauma right now, like because you're into that. And it's not that I'm not into that, like I chose this job intentionally, but I tend not to share that. And but it came up, and like I'm happy it did. But one of the things that kind of happened was they were asking me like my take on certain things, and a part of it had to do with like relationships and some other content like that. But what was really interesting to me is sort of like what the perception of what a therapist is and what it is that I know. So because I'm a therapist, should that mean that, I'm aware of what it means to be human maybe more than other people do? Like, does that make me a guru? Does that mean that like I'm Captain Content, where it's like, oh, you just didn't read the right thing. Like, here's the right self-help book. And I think, I think for me, it's been an interesting challenge because one, like I don't really like to be put in a box on certain things, but two, I really struggle with the world of psychology. I struggle with whatever cliche I have in my head of what like a clinical therapist is. And I think a part of that is just my own personal experience. Part of that is like, James, like who hurt you? So like I recognize and hold that as a part of my bias. And I do have a little bit of like a grievance against the world of psychology. I think a part of that is that I think that a part of what bundles into what an image of a therapist is very much like a product of, being in America right now, a Western context, like a very clinical, scientific approach that I personally feel is very insecure. I think, our attempt to make sense of the world of psychology or the world of people who are psychically wounded comes from a position of uncertainty, and we're trying to make certainty out of that.
Give me a little bit more on that, because I understand what you're saying when you're saying that. Give me a little bit more when you're saying that.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think there really are any answers. And I think that makes the position of being a therapist really daunting and scary, depending on the day, the person you're working with, the challenge that you're working with. I don't really think there are any answers. And that's when I say uncertainty, I mean that. And I think the insecurity is if someone's coming to you and they have an ailment or an issue, and you go to them and you say, well, I don't think there are any answers. It's like, well, fuck you, which I totally respect. And in kind, I feel like the world of psychology has responded with like, okay, here are the answers. Here's this modality, we call it modalities, basically a branch of psychology that has like a certain approach that I can use and leverage. And if I do it the right way and I follow all these steps, then you're the problem if it doesn't work, almost. And I'm taking a huge stretch when I say that.
No, that's totally fair.
But that seems to be like kind of the quiet implication. And it helps me, the therapist, have like a certain amount of self-esteem about what it is that I provide, because I can know, well, there's this backbone. And we come to this like certainty, this search for certainty, where we use the phrase sort of like evidence-based approach. And if I said I use an evidence-based approach and this other person doesn't, ultimately I can be like, well, the other person who's not using an evidence-based approach is acting unethically.
Yeah.
And there's something in that language that feels gaslighty to me.
Sure. I just want to say thank you for joining us from the very beginning of this journey. We're super excited to have you. And if you could, the one simple free thing that you could do to continue to support our channel more than watching our content is liking and subscribing our videos so we can continue to just do what we're doing, building more content. So please like and subscribe. Let's get back to the video. Absolutely, man. I mean, first, there's so much in what you said that I like. We could take it in so many different directions, but I think one of the things that really stuck out to me is just the field of psychology in and of itself, especially in the West, has been framed in a way, as you said, where people have issues, challenges, problems, and if they can't solve it, then you are just another problem for society to deal with. And that causes a lot of harm. You know, even just looking back at the last 50 years of psychology and how we've gone from institutionalization to now, you know, more outpatient kind of clinical work. But
can we like just summarize that for the audience? What that is?
Yeah. So institutionalization is just when everybody, you know, that had mental health issues, you know, depression, anxiety, anywhere from honestly to like people being autistic, neurodivergent in any way, schizophrenic, you would just group all of these people that had different mental health issues together and put them in an institution, a hospital type environment, pills, drugs, and a lot of inhumane practices in terms of like taking care of people, and calling that care, right? When it really was just a prison, if we're being honest, right? And so I think the world of America has really struggled, in my perspective, since that time, because we still carry the same mentality of, if you can't solve your problems, you're the problem.
Right.
But we've gotten rid of the blatant kind of poster in the sky that was the institution that says, you know, this is where you go when you have these issues. Now there's people on the streets, there's people that are suffering in their homes, and everybody's looking for healing in some way. And as you also pointed out, it gets very tricky as a therapist because you're put in this really elevated position of power to be the conduit of healing when you yourself are trying to scramble and scratch and search for meaning in your own life. And sometimes it can really feel like, from the therapist's perspective, that you're up here and your client is down here. Even on a very subconscious level, some of my clients will say to me like, dude, I imagine your conversations with your partner, or like when you're having, you know, regulation practices with yourself, are like just the best. And I'm like, if you only knew how messy it can be sometimes. Like, I'm in the trenches just like you know. But I think that it does also come back to what you're saying in terms of like, we live in a culture where we want perfect solutions, and we create these practices, DBT, CBT, IFS, you know, all these different things.
EMDR, brain spotting.
Right. Yeah. That have founded use, but it can be very dangerous when we say that these things are universal, like they fit everybody and everybody can benefit from these practices, or that they are the end all be all in terms of healing, when therapy in and of itself has been around before the Western world. And so when we're talking about therapy, man, let's expand our view on what that actually means.
100%. Yeah. I think that's kind of where you hear me respond in when I talk about like evidence-based practices, and I say that feels gaslighty. I'm filled with sort of like, even hearing you say that, like I'm filled with like anger and protectiveness, which I don't think is always like produces the most rational conclusions, being from that emotional state. But I do think it's rooted in something real, which is I understand that there is value in a continued exploration of human experience. And I think that DBT, CBT, ACT, all these different modalities, EMDR, brain spotting, touch on different ways in which we experience the world. Some of them which have a huge scientific basis that are actually really useful and helpful. But sort of become, I think is where the anger kind of comes from, is there's a sense of which there's a grandeur that's put there of an implication of like, this is the only right way. This is the only part of human experience. You need to do it this way in order to protect maybe the safety of the client or to lead to healing, that I think I then become defensive and protective and annoyed at. And it to me, I think it becomes an affront to the complexity of human experience and the fact that my clients are actually way, way wiser than I think is being given credit for when we create that grandeur, when we say that one approach is the right way to do it.
Yeah.
That, we miss out on the client's ability to really figure a lot of this stuff out themselves. I honestly think that all the people that I've worked with have many of the tools that they need to be able to figure it out. I think a part of that, yes, like these modalities can help them kind of find a way to find those tools 100%. But there is something much deeper than that I think is a core ingredient that is forgotten and neglected, that has existed before those 50 years, that is ancient.
Absolutely.
That I just feel like it almost feels like this sacred thing that's been treaded on when we just sort of claim that this one approach is the right way.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you. I think that what I have found is that oftentimes that flavor is also going to be a little bit more mild.
I like this. No, this is good.
It's good.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. What I have found is that oftentimes people can get very reliant on specific things, for being honest, in this society. We have a very addictive tendency with things. We have a very "this saves me" mentality with things. And I think sometimes that can be helpful. Even for myself, there's times that when I've been really lost, I've zeroed in on a particular thing. For me, I really resonate if I was to pick a modality. Not to say that I'm subscribing to any of them in terms of like, I'm for this one and this one only. But like IFS makes a lot of sense to my mind. I think just because of the compassionate way that it's framed oftentimes. And I've used that to be able to really help me understand myself on a deeper level. Now, where I've ran into trouble is when I look at that modality and I'm like, that is the only way that I'm going to find meaning and understanding and healing in the world. And I lose contact almost even with my own intuition and embodied experience because I'm more reliant on something than my own internal compass. And I think sometimes that's what at least I try to do as a therapist, is like help people to find their own internal compass and their own internal witness, which I think sometimes can get lost when you're going through all the rigmarole of you need to do these certain steps in the modality of therapy to be clinically or ethically viable, when I think at the root of it, people just sometimes need to be witnessed. They need to be heard. They need to be seen. They need to be felt. And that can be done in so many different ways. And helping them to remember that, I think, is really pivotal and important. That's probably the most important thing that I do. And I don't do that with one particular label. I don't even do that in the world of therapy itself. I can do that in so many different ways. Families, friends, at the barber shop, at the grocery store. Like there's these little microcosm moments that can be kind of built on where the Western world would say, well, that's not necessarily therapy. And I would say, well, I would beg to differ.
Yeah. Oh man. I love this. So I was reading a thread in a sort of therapist only chat, like an online forum. And according to our licensure, the question is, so with like insurance clients, or like with clients that are using insurance to pay for sessions, we have to diagnose them because the insurance provider requires us to do it. They won't pay for sessions unless we diagnose our clients. But for private pay, we don't have that same direct obligation from the insurance provider. So a therapist was asking, do we need to diagnose? And there was a lot of discussion, but ultimately many people were saying, if you're not you have to diagnose them from just your from the ethics of your licensure, and that's because you need to be able to have like a treatment plan and know what you're doing with the client, because then you're just kind of like throwing stuff against the wall, which I do understand that point.
Sure.
I really do. But one of the individuals went as far as to say, which very much is the case of like the license, I'm sure, that if you don't diagnose the person, then you're basically a coach. And I think when we look at the language of that, even if that is technically true, I'm brought to this point you were making before of this act of therapy, which is something that like you could do at the barbershop, you could do at family dinner, you can do, you know, like purchasing a coffee at Starbucks, or maybe not purchasing a coffee at Starbucks. That is something much deeper than this conversation of like, are you a coach or are you a therapist? And then I'm left with like, well, what is therapy then? You know, like what is it? What is this act that we're providing that might not necessarily even need to be adhering to, you know, the ethics codes of a license? What is it that is being provided that is important and valuable that can exist in a therapy room in tandem with approaches that have been done in like a forensic, like in a sense of like, you know, it's evidence-based or not evidence-based? What is that thing that people come for to seek some element of healing that can exist in or outside of the therapy room?
Yeah. I mean, I have an answer to that.
I would love to hear.
Curious of yours, but I think it's time and intentionality. Right? Because we live in a society where everything is so fast-paced, and people really struggle to slow down and to have intentional conversation and to be witnessed. And I think there's something very sacred about creating a space or having a space created for you where you can be experienced without judgment, without any kind of criticism that's super just, you know, damaging. Hopefully not that's everybody's experience in therapy. But it's a bubble, it's a container, right? It's a warm embrace oftentimes. And I think that is a currency that we're running out of. We don't have that. It's a luxury now in our society to have that unadulterated time. And I think the more and more that society progresses, unfortunately, the more and more that what you and I do will become necessity, or it will become kind of everybody is thirsting after. And I think that there is definitely a heavy thirst because there isn't safe containers for people to often exist in.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
I love that. I mean, I want to chew on it, and it reminds me of something that I've discovered in the world of therapy myself. But I like before getting there, I kind of want to get to a different, more abstract concept, which is so there's a book out there called The World After Capital, and I don't know if it was published. You can buy the book on Amazon, so I guess yeah, it's published. But he essentially theorizes that we've gone from different models of scarcity, so it's kind of like from the background of economics.
Interesting.
So as a society, we started with scarcity of food. And so hunting and gathering was sort of what we did. And then we went from scarcity of food to, we discovered farming. So then there was a scarcity of land, and being able to, allocate that, have that land so you could produce as much food as possible. And you could grow from like a small little maybe hut to like a giant city if you had enough land to be able to produce enough food to be able to incentivize people to continue to create a little bit of an economy too. And then from there, from scarcity of food to a scarcity of land, a scarcity of capital and industry, and that was one that was a little bit more abstract, a lot more abstract. With industrialization, we were able to produce much more quickly with assembly lines and that kind of thing. And so we've kind of come into like maybe a little bit more of what we know as like modern day capitalism. And in that we've sort of sought efficiency to be able to produce more capital, more ability to be able to purchase, or more ability to be able to create value, let's say. The problem is, and this is a really big, I know it's like how is this, what is the
You're good, I'm
with time?
with you. Yeah.
But the problem is that we got to a point where the whole basis of like having a scarcity of capital, what allowed that to work was that efficiency that we were squeezing out had a cost to it. So there was like a cap on how much we could produce. But once we got into the world of like actual technology and the internet, our ability to produce was no longer capped.
Yeah.
So you look at something like Facebook, it doesn't cost them more to be able to obtain more users.
Yeah.
It doesn't have like, I mean, sure, like you could have a data center and you could be like, okay, this data center that's required to be able to like host people on the internet needs to be a little bit bigger, but it's not really like that significant. It's basically zero. They call it zero marginal cost. And I will not go, like if you want to talk about more economics, we can
We're
stay
in the
there.
trenches. Yeah.
But because of this, capitalism has sort of, and many other things, I'm oversimplifying, capitalism and like sort of the scarcity of capital is no longer as relevant. And we've reached into a new level of capital, new level of scarcity, and that is attention.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I finally got to the point, which leads off from what you were saying about time and intentionality, which is that our attention and the amount of attention that we can devote to a given thing is very limited, because a lot of our time is dedicated to, like, because there's so many things that are trying to distract us and be able to drive capital right now. So Facebook, it's monetized through advertising, and so it's incentivized to be able to distract us with things that are usually triggering. It's laughter, it's sexual, or it's anger. Those are the things that are going to keep our attention. And so basically all these organizations are competing for our attention at any given time. And between every single like move to scarcity, usually there's been some sort of like civil strife. And I think we are kind of seeing some of that strife right now too. But this point of like attention, I think, relates a lot to this point you're making about time, which is that it's really hard for us to devote time to really simple things.
Yeah.
So you hear like touch grass. That's actually really revolutionary. For me to, in between my sessions, go outside and touch grass is insane. When I could literally access almost all of human knowledge on this device.
It's wild. It's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. You have more, or you want to go off?
I could keep going, but I would love to hear your response.
I think that you're 1,000% on point. It is scarcity, right? Attention, time, intention, like all of that is scarcity. That's probably the number one thing that I think my clients come to me for and say, I don't even know if they consciously will say it, but it's there, it's thematically there, where they'll say something to the effect of, I don't have anybody to talk to. I have no one that accepts me for all of me, for my authentic form.
Yeah.
I have no one to sit with me in the trenches when things aren't okay. And I don't know what to do. I guess you as the therapist can do that. Hold all of it. Right? And there's this really kind of powerful sense of grief that I have for that. Even for myself. Because if I just even make it personal, like, I'm very good at holding space for other people. I would say that I am malnourished in some ways for people holding space for me. Right.
Yeah.
Friends, you do a great job, fantastic. I have a couple other friends that do a really good job, and probably if I was to look at it, I am more blessed than a lot of people, especially just because a lot of my friends come from the background that we come from, and so holding space is kind of what we do. And yet there is this need and necessity that I crave for, which is to be seen in my fullness, to be questioned in my fullness, in terms of like, ask me questions about myself, experience me. And all of my clients, and myself included, share this thirst, this desire. That says a lot about where we are, you know?
Yeah. Be curious about my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to get lost in all of the world that's around us. And it's so easy to get lost in, I don't have my phone with me, but like you were saying, just what's right here, because the entire world is in the palm of your hand. You know? We weren't created to have that type of access.
Content. Yeah.
Yeah. It's too much. And so therapy has now become this necessity to say, hey, we need to pay for time and intention and space, because I'm coming from a lack there, like you were saying, right? So I'm 100% with you, man.
I feel that in my bones, what you just said. And like, I'm realizing when I started with, kind of an assault against evidence-based practices, I think that there, in there was like me as client. Going to, certain therapists and feeling like I wasn't given that time and intentionality.
Wow.
And that it hurt. It hurt a lot, because it was, I don't think it was difficult for me to ask for help, but I think it was difficult for me to receive it. And I needed to feel like the person in front of me genuinely cared about my experience. And I think that one place where we can fail, and I've certainly failed myself as a therapist, is like leading with the like, oh, anxious to please. Sounds like you're too nice to people. You need to set more boundaries.
Yeah.
Oh, neurodivergent friendly workbook. Maybe you need to focus more on your emotions.
Yeah.
Oh, it sounds like you have a lot of negative thoughts about yourself. Here you go. Oh, like trauma. Let's focus on that and like do like, this like hypnotism thing. And I think all of these are and I've seen them be helpful in helping people contextualize that they're not alone in their struggles. And they can serve, if you strike when the iron's hot, and time is that element, and their intentionality is there, all those modalities can prosper so well.
Yeah.
But that core ingredient of time and intentionality, and honestly just a genuine curiosity from that therapist, is what allows that to work. It's the glue.
Yeah.
100%,
man. 100%. It's, the times that I've asked my clients what has worked in therapy, 9 times out of 10, it is not some technique that I've used. It's the fact that I cried when something was really, really painful for somebody. It's the fact that I, maybe gave a gift that was meaningful, right? Because it was intentional in terms of like where the client needed to go, right? It was the thought that I had. I was carrying them with me, right? It was the times that I showed up as a human being and exposed my imperfections. And that gave them the courage to also be imperfect and to try. Like, there's no secret recipe there. Anybody could do that. Yet it takes intention, it takes vulnerability, it takes humility in some ways.
And capacity.
Yeah.
And so when we ask the question of like, what is it that therapy sits on? And like we agree that time and intentionality plays a role. And then we think then further about, well, what is that? If that's what therapy sits on, where does that happen even outside of the space of therapy? Then how do we create that as people? How do we create that as people where it's not necessarily a power dynamic between me as a person who's come in and really purposely said, hey, this is what I want to provide for you. And I feel like I can do that based on this relationship. But instead it's like you as stranger, someone else's stranger, or as someone you know, how do we create that act? That form of love and compassion for individuals that, so I'll give an example, like where I was able to do this and I'm not always able to do this. I'll be honest, like I'm better at it now, but like I go into the comment section. I do. Yeah. I do it under a pseudonym usually, and to get away from like, people knowing my name and who I am. And it's so bad for my mental health. Like I never come out of that like, damn, I'm so happy unless it's like a humorous like video, like real, like some people have some like should be comedians because they have the perfect one-liners. But no, I go into like contentious debates and I'll find someone who like, it seems like they have a position that's really, like, if you could just look at it this way is sort of how I feel. And let's just imagine that they're not a bot, because I know that there are a lot of bots out there and like distinguishing between them is hard and, whatever. But I honestly don't think it matters with what I'm about to say. So the video that it was a woman applying moisturizer to her daughter, a black woman, and like, for all y'all that don't know, like moisturizer for black people, like, when I got ash, like you can tell, like ash is like sort of the white
is there
dryness of the skin, and like being moisturized is very important, especially when it's a dry season. But in the video, like the mom was like forcefully like applying it to the little girl's face, and this white woman posted on it, hey, that does not look right. Like that, you are causing harm to that child. She's like, why would you do that? And I was triggered when I saw that. But I was mostly triggered because she said, I've studied, mental health and I'm a mental health professional. And I don't think, and I'm just like, commenting on everything we just said, I think you can now see why I feel so protective when someone says like evidence-based practice. But anyway, was kind of like presenting to her in like the most calm fashion, like, hey, I don't think that that's the way I would go about this. Like, maybe you should ask like a question first with like humility and see why people, like, if you really want to genuinely know why this is happening, maybe instead of like adding a judgment, you could kind of just like
So good.
more sincerely ask. And like, and she kept kind of going off. I was like, like if you really keep this context and like you don't apply any humility, people are just going to call you racist. And she's like, well, I think you're racist, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, there was that point where I was like, okay, like obviously either this is a bot or, like this is a person who is really just being very stubborn and like being upset. I could just keep going off and like describe the reasons that they're a terrible person. And I think like going back to this comment before about like love or intentionality or whatever else, I decided to like click on her page, and I saw a lot of like a lot of videos of children being harmed. So some of that was tied with Israel and Palestine and the kids that have been sort of impacted by the bombings that have happened. And I was like, who hurt you?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, like let's assume that this is actually like a person. She could have gone through something really traumatic as a kid, and she could have seen that video and been triggered. And like, yes, like in my heart of hearts, as someone who's been wounded through like just racism and people not understanding, I want to be like, well, that doesn't excuse this behavior of you judging an entire culture. And like, I understand, I can hold that. And I also hold the fact that this person, someone hurt her. And I decided to just abstract myself from the conversation. I was just like, oh, like I'm realizing that there's something going on here that's much deeper than what we're talking about. And I don't really think it's going to be productive for us to like keep going this, back and forth.
Yeah.
So I hope I didn't come off the wrong way. And like, I kind of just pulled myself out, and she appreciated it. And she was like, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, man. That's a very interesting example because, in the conversation of like therapy, right, and like capacity, you almost took on the therapist-y role in terms of like holding space, creating curiosity, versus having a snap judgment about somebody, right? And because of that, you discovered a little bit more of her humanity, right?
Yeah.
And if we're looking at society at large, we don't do that now. And I think that that's why, again, these spaces of therapy that are created with a therapist in mind or at the center, are so requested right now because we're coming from that scarcity again.
Right.
Versus understanding that if we were to slow down as individuals and be more curious and open and investigating certain situations and certain people, that you would open up windows of therapy in the 1-to-1, in the 2-to-1, in the 2-to-2, in the group all the time. That's for me where I really find nourishment the most is right now I don't have a therapist. I wanna explore that. But I've always said to myself, even if I don't have a therapist, I still do therapy, right? Because for me, I've always been blessed with people that I could have conversations with. I would say especially in my older life, 20s and now into my 30s. And so whenever a problem or something, or I needed a little bit of space, like I would go to somebody that I knew that I could trust and that would create that space for me. And therapy would happen. And I would come away with a better sense of myself, or just a better sense of my connection with people or my disconnection. And there would be a little bit of direction there in some way, or a little bit of space that was made. And again, I go back to what I said before. One, I think that doesn't happen very often, because even to do that takes a lot of faith and vulnerability and capacity to trust that somebody is going to listen and that somebody will see you. I have had to test the waters myself with people that have seen me or people that haven't. And I've been burned badly by people that haven't. And even people that were therapists. Like, probably some of my worst burns come from people that have that title, because they didn't slow down and they didn't see me for a human being and they didn't ask questions. And some of the times the most nourishing conversations that I've had are with people that have no affiliation with psychology at all, but just have an abundance of openness and generosity and compassion. So I think, I love that example, but I think that, like, as a society at large, we underestimate our own potentiality as people, as individuals. We get overwhelmed by society sometimes, and we forget our own sense of power and humanity. But I also think that that's a part of the whole problem with capitalism and, the grind, is that we lose focus on our own existential power. I could say more, but I won't.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm reminded of, like, sort of the cliche of American tourists going to, like, other sort of like the eat, pray, love, and going to other, like, cultures to seek something that's deeper, or seeking meaning, because there's something missing. As you explain that, and part of that makes me wonder, as like a higher level structure, if the way that things are designed, it makes it really hard to have the capacity to kind of be intentional for each other, and that very well does feel like a consequence of just the structure of things and how we're constantly inundated with content, information, and attention is just split all the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really hard to, when we talk about, like, making space, and, like, what does that even mean? Like, we talk about, like, oh, like, I want to make space. It's very, like, a therapy term, or, like, yoga term.
Super ambiguous.
Yeah, but, like, in the context
population.
What's that?
I said just ambiguous for the general population.
Yeah. But in the context of, like, what we're talking about, I do think it kind of works in that my ability to make space for my clients comes from my ability to make space in myself. And that comes from the therapy I receive, from the vacations I go on, if I can go on, if I can afford that, my own financial flexibility. It also comes from my support system, friends, family, and that in itself, like, when we think about that making of space, it is a collective effort. Therapists see therapists, so there's this, like, continual chain. I heard this joke from some of my like cohort mates of, like, like, a therapist will go to a therapist, and therefore, like, if you're the therapist on the top, you're the grand therapist. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But that act logically doesn't sound like, it's like, well, then who holds the buck? Eventually, like, someone is just, like, being the martyr saint holding everybody's thing. But actually, I think that when we carry somebody else's pain, that a part of it dissipates we do have to carry it, and there is, like, I wouldn't say burden is the right word, but there's a weight to it, but that it loses some of its weight. And if we all do that for each other, if we can all slow down time for each other, then we can, as a society, like, there's enough surplus for us to make that work. Yeah. But it's really hard for us to do, and it's really hard for us to, I think if we were to go around and just make space for other people, we'd find ourselves deflated very quickly. And I think that the only way, like the real way to be able to do that, and like to take on that role, is to make sure that you're creating space within yourself through community, to put yourselves in positions where you can actually maybe not personalize things that are happening in the same way. And honestly, like I think that that's, to me, one of the big values of what therapy is. It's not necessarily going to be fixed. It's not, I have generalized anxiety disorder, help me absolve that, so that, like, what pill do I need to take to, and medication can be helpful. But I think a part of what someone can get from therapy is to be able to have capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something to that for sure. Absolutely. I think that most people, not most, I mean, not like a generalization, a lot of people come to therapy and their capacity is diminished, or they don't have any conscious awareness of what their capacity is. I was going to say that while you were talking, the thought that I was having is, what if somebody comes to therapy and they struggle, or just, let's say, even outside of therapy, because we're expanding what it is. What if somebody just struggles with creating space for themselves, right? Because there's something to that, whether it be intentional or unintentional, where humans often struggle with creating space for themselves. What do you do?
I mean, I think that's fundamental to every single problem that we deal with. I think is one of creating space for, like, I honestly think it's a tax of just conscious awareness. I think of like a computer that has like a fixed amount of information that can be stored on it, a fixed amount of memory that it can hold, and that there needs to be a dumping, that happens. And not all of it is, honestly, a large chunk of it is emotional. And I honestly think that that's when you're slowing things down and you're showing a deep curiosity, when that is believed, because that's not like, oh, logically I believe you all the time. When that's believed here in your body, I think that creates the avenue for someone to create, like, you are absolving some of the space that's there. I think it's really hard to like expand the amount of memory someone has, and I think honestly that's kind of an unfair thing to do. I mean, you can do that through, like, I don't know, like something like yoga or like physical acts, like if you're curious about that and you want to do it and you're inspired. But I think that the act of therapy is, if you really feel like the therapist or the person, your father or your friend or the mentor, is bought in almost like a spiritual sense to what you're experiencing, that is what is relieving the space. I don't think of it as like, how do I create space for you? I mean, yeah, you could talk about someone who doesn't have boundaries and they say yes to everything and they're exhausted, and like, yeah, there are very practical things, but there's also the fact that those people generally, they're all self-aware. They know that they say yes to too many things, that they're exhausted. There's something under that that's emotional, that I think, the process of therapy is making space for that emotional thing that's driving these decisions that are leading them to be exhausted.
Yeah. It goes back to this with that witnessing piece.
Exactly.
Right. The witnessing in and of itself creates a sense of capacity, or a sense of like catharsis that leads to a diminished kind of or a fuller reserve, I guess, right? Or a person who is experiencing emotional dissonance or upset or volatility, that you can increase your capacity when you let go. I think I see that a lot. I think about that a lot in my life, and this is a totally different conversation, but I think one of the things that I think about is how this relates to men in particular, because men often are the people in our society, by and large, that hold without pouring back out, because we don't like taking up space, or we've been told that we can't take up space. And then we make certain moves, or we don't make certain moves, or we struggle to connect with certain people, often the people closest to us, but oftentimes it also has to do in some way with society, because our capacity is so full because we haven't been witnessed, right? And it's just devastating.
It is.
Devastating. But it is also something, and it's also something that applies to a lot of people, just as a general kind of basis for where we are in time now.
Yes. And you lead to a point that I feel like maybe you were going to say next, which, and you've brought this up in our conversations before, but it's one of survival. That when survival is sort of the prerogative, what room do feelings have? What room does emotional capacity have when I'm worried about how I'm going to put food on the table? I'm worried about my job security. I'm worried about what is possible. That there's a sort of luxury of being able to even have the time to be able to create the time. So it's one thing of like, I don't have any time because, I just haven't prioritized that because of capitalism. And you go and you see a therapist and you slow down time with them and you can tell they're invested. And it's like, yes, that's great. But not everyone can afford to do that.
Yeah.
Not everyone can afford to slow down, because if they do, they'll stop and they won't be able to survive the circumstance. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. I guess that's a case by case basis. But there is a reality where that feels to be the case. Is like, if I'm surviving, why would I share my feelings? So yeah, I'm curious, like, is there room for what we're saying about sort of this intentionality and this witnessing and survival at the same time?
I think that that's a difficult question, because I think in a lot of ways you also have to you have to consider two more things. And I guess that sentence didn't make sense, but there are two more things that are applicable to this situation, which is belief and perspective. And the reason that I say that is because if you're coming from a place of scarcity, or of restricted access, right? A survival mode, I guess is what I'm trying to get to. And you're like, I don't have the time, which then equals the access. I don't have access to it because I'm in survival mode. I can't look up. Oftentimes that person, if they have anything, will go to a therapist to get them out. Hence, therapy.
Right.
Now, if you come from a situation or a background where you have had beautiful, abundant people around you, open people around you, it inspires and creates belief that there are those people out there in the world that can provide that for you. And it inspires perspective and hope that is even a possibility beyond what is the clinical, right? Meaning that, again, we're going back to this idea that we're so practiced in seeing therapists as the only people that can hold that space. But what happens when part of the problem with expanding therapy beyond what this is based in, like you were saying, survival, belief, and perspective? Because some people, even myself included in some ways, I don't inherently believe that I have space based on my story, the core wounds that I have. I don't believe. And because of that non-belief at times, I don't perceive and see the people that are sometimes right in front of my face, or a conversation away, or a chance away. Yeah, it's a risk, And maybe I can take that risk because I'm not in survival mode. But I think that you have to bring those three things together to create, at least in my mind, a better understanding of why therapy is limited in its nature here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, what we're talking about is existential. And when I say existential, I mean, what we're talking about is way deeper than just what is therapy. It's what is fundamental to that person. What is the meaning? What is the reason for this person to be doing anything? And that happens sort of separate from whether or not they have food on the table.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think of like Viktor Frankl, the therapist who was in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And
Man's search for meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the ability to create meaning even while suffering is happening.
Yeah.
That becomes possible when you talk about sort of this element of belief. But that's a very hard thing to do. It's a leap of faith. Even if, faith doesn't need to be religious, but it's a leap into something that doesn't make immediate sense. Mm-hmm. It is diving into an uncertainty of, it's something that's much deeper than just like food or security.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is security though, in a way, right?
Physical security, yeah.
It's existential, like you're saying, it's beyond the physical. And I think that is the greatest threat to us as human beings sometimes. It is the existential. Sometimes that can hurt more than the physical at times, right? It's something to kill a body, but it's something more to kill a soul, right? And so many of us in this society, our souls have been damaged and destroyed or distorted, and that limits our belief and our perspective to believe in healing beyond what is this room, what is beyond the modality, what is beyond the prescribed. And I think it's a real shame. There's a lot of grief that I have for that, because I said this before in a different podcast. Humans are very good at remembering the hurt that we receive. We're decent at remembering the hurt that we can give to somebody else, but we're very bad at remembering the healing capacity that each of us holds within us, and that other people hold that capacity as well.
Yeah. So what we're talking about then is there's something that is physical that exists that we all know by virtue of just like existing. Mm. But then there's something that is sort of like this spiritual dimension that can be a-religious. It doesn't need to be rooted in, you can be secular and believe this too, that I think is unspoken in the process of healing. And if we're really going to like endeavor to nourish that, I guess we could talk about both. Like the physical is super relevant, especially if there's influence that we can have in that. Mm-hmm. But the spiritual piece is something that is so, it's so experiential. And when I say experiential, it's so much more amorphous and abstract than I think we give credit for in the world of psychology, but just in general. And I think it's very easy for any of us to be afraid of that because it's so complex. And I think in that fear, that's when we as therapists, but also we as people, rely on solutions. And solutions are the physical.
Yeah.
And I think we diminish, unintentionally, I don't think it's ever malicious, but we diminish the spiritual in the seeking of solutions. That spiritual part of, that experiential, spiritual meaning, purpose-based part of that person.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I hear that of like what people enjoy about therapy is like, I like how my friends care, but I feel like all they do is offer solutions.
Yeah.
I want to be heard and listened to.
Mm-hmm.
I want to feel like there's genuine, deep
Mm-hmm.
curiosity about my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And when we even talk about, or when I bring up, when we talk about like capacity, I think a part of that is not like just a physical capacity of like, oh, you're here in your space, or creating time and slowing down. I think it's not just physically slowing down time by like the hour that you dedicate to the session. It's spiritually slowing down time.
Yeah.
By providing a curiosity to someone's experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is 100% the core. 100% the core. And yeah, I feel like I could say more, but I feel like that's it, man. Like that's it. Like we need to see each other's soul and hold each other's soul when we're thinking about therapy and what therapy can be. And I think that you're correct in saying that even the prospect of doing that is such a daunting thing. It's such a daunting thing. And I think in some ways it's even a forbidden thing in the way that we frame religion. And when I speak of my soul, it's something that is between God and man, or God and woman, or God and person, not for another person to touch or to witness. But when you really boil it down, when you are creating space and you're witnessing, you are witnessing somebody's soul. And that's, some people might say that that's blasphemous, but like, that's what it is when you exist in that space with them and there is that sense of deep connection. And I think if people really thought about it, like genuinely thought about it, they would agree.
Yeah. It is inherently an imperfect endeavor from the position of the person who's seeking to witness the soul. That I know that I will not be able to truly be able to honor the depth, and I don't want to say the word infinity for reasons that you and I know, but honestly, the infinity of that person's being. That when we really truly get to that point, it's like, and we're trying to do that, I become human and the other person's soul becomes bare, and it's like I can't possibly heal that.
Yeah.
But what I can do is almost like, I don't know, like I don't want to say bow before it, but be in the presence of that complexity, and show that I'm still together. And I think there's something to be said. It kind of reminds me of like in the spiritual, like in the truly religious lens, in many religions, there's this idea of like when you're in the presence of a spirit, you look down. You don't look at the spirit, but you're very much like in the room with it. And that kind of reminds me of that, where it's like, it's not that I'm like brazenly going in there and I'm looking at this infinity and being like, hey, I can fix this. But it's like, there's a humility of like, of respecting whatever unwritten colloquial rules are within that culture.
Yeah.
Because of just the sheer size and enormity of what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And it's funny that we've kind of, not funny, but like it's interesting that we've kind of netted out here, because I very much agree with it, but I could just imagine what it sounds like on the other side of like, wow, you really think what you do is that big of a deal. And I, you know, to which I say, yeah, I do think. And I also think that I don't need to be a therapist to do that.
No.
And I also think that many of these viewers and many of the people who aren't listening or viewing this have done this without even realizing it for other people.
Dude, that's it.
Which is a scary thing to realize.
Yeah. So
it's
scary.
a lot of responsibility.
It is. And many people would bow out of that responsibility. And people do all the time.
All the time.
All the time. I do sometimes when I don't think I can, right? And there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
And yet, I think that we haven't tapped into the full capacity or potential for actually existing in that space and not solving, like you're saying. You don't need to go and like carry the soul and take it to its resting place. Just exist with it on its journey, right? Because it is a beautiful, painful, grief-stricken, complex journey. But that's life. We're all living it. We're all trying to figure it out. And if we don't admit that at some point, I think, again, we don't tap into the reality that life's messy and sometimes we can be the light that another person needs.
Just by sharing in that suffering.
That's it.
Not by knowing what the exit is, where the exit is.
Yeah, that's it, man. I could say more. I'm gonna wrap it, but appreciate you, bro, for this conversation.
Appreciate you too. Yeah, I know. This is
good,
something
man.
else. Yeah,
this was good, bro.
it.
Like, didn't know where we were going, but
Me either.
I appreciate you, man. Just to the people that are watching, man, I just would say this last piece, man. You know, recognize that y'all are lights, that you do have power, and be careful with it more than anything. You know what I mean? Witnessing somebody is one of the most beautiful and blessed gifts that you can experience. We're very good, I would say, instinctually at witnessing children as they come into the world and as they experience life, enjoying and walking with them. We've forgotten how to do that as adults, as we age. And we don't ever stop needing somebody to walk with us in our journey. So just a reminder, don't forget your power, don't forget the power of other people. And let's expand what therapy means and remind the world that there are some great people in it. And all of us deserve love, compassion, and care. Till next time. Alrighty, bro.
Yeah, that was fire.
That was good.
I like
dog.
that last line. There were some moments where you were talking, I was like, this is a soundbite right there.
Bro, right back at you, dog. Right back at you,
Shit.
bro.
I didn't think it was going to, yeah, it's cool. You never know where it's going to go.